Welcome to another edition of the Watchful Citizen, a public access a public access cable program brought to you by the Lancaster County Democratic Party. My name is Benny Shobe. I'm your host, and I'm thrilled to welcome in studio today Dennis Crawford, candidate for Congress. Dennis, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I want to thank you and the other volunteers of the Lancaster County Democratic Party for helping my campaign. A lot of people have put a lot of hours in the campaign, and I deeply appreciate their help and support, and I look forward to working with you and other members of the local party between now and November 4th.
Well, thank you for that. We appreciate you running. You're a good candidate, and we're happy to support you.
Well, thank you.
I want to ask you a few questions about you and your candidacy. Tell us, first off, a little bit about you. Where are you from, and where did you go to school?
Well, I grew up in Lincoln. I've lived in Lincoln most of my life. My family has lived in the Lincoln area since 1940. I'm a third generation Lincolnite. I went to college at Creighton University, earned a political science degree there in 1982.
Nice.
Went through Creighton with Jane Raybould, a great candidate for lieutenant governor.
She is. You guys will make a great team.
Thank you.
Yeah, working together.
I went to law school at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and graduated there in 1985. I began working in law in Lincoln in 1986. I've practiced law in the Lincoln area since 1986. I've been representing people injured in car accidents and people injured on the job. I've helped a lot of people. I've solved a lot of problems. I've been married to my wife, Diane, for 30 years. We have three adult children. They're all out of the house, and since we're empty nesters, we had a lot of extra time, and I talked to my wife last fall, and I said, geez, what are you going to do with all this extra time, all this free time? And I came up with this bright idea to run for Congress, and surprisingly enough, Diane has agreed, and she's been a great teammate on the campaign.
I know Diane. She is a great teammate, and 30 years is wow. You don't seem mature enough to be married that long.
She's put up with you for 30 years, so she's a good person.
Yes. I want to ask you a little bit, if you would help me with a little bit of a civics lesson. You're running for Congress. Do you mind helping give me a little tutorial refresher on federal government and the branches?
Okay. Under our Constitution, we have three branches of government. We have the legislative branch of government, which if all goes as planned, it hasn't been the last few years, they actually enact the laws, and then the president will either veto the law or sign them into law, and the president, with his veto power, has a big role in negotiating the outcome of the bills to his liking, so he doesn't have to veto it. And obviously the president will have his supporters in the Congress introduce bills that he supports and try to lobby the members of Congress to pass the bills. And then the judicial branch, they rule on the constitutionality of the bills once they become law after they pass.
Okay. So there's legislative, executive, and judicial.
That's correct.
And you're running for a position in the legislative.
The lawmaking branch.
Okay.
That's correct.
And there are help me with the two different, there's senators and then there's representatives, congressmen. How do you?
There's two houses. There's the House of Representatives, which is based upon population.
Okay.
There's 435 members of the House. There's 3 House members in Nebraska. It's based on population. And you have the Senate, which is there's two senators for every state for a total of 100 senators. That was a compromise that the Founding Fathers agreed to back in 1787 in Philadelphia. They didn't want the more populous states to dominate the least populous states. So we have 2 houses to balance off those concerns.
And you're running for an office in which,
the U.S. House of Representatives, Congressional District #1 in Nebraska, which is Lancaster County and 15 other counties, which are kind of a letter C curled around the Omaha metropolitan area.
And Nebraska has 3 congressional districts.
That's correct.
And you're running for the first. And that big C around Omaha is really important. Because you look at it, I was expecting to be straight lines up and down the state, but it's kind of drawn in an odd shape.
In 2013, the legislature redrew the districts. The first CD used to go from South Dakota down to Kansas, but now it's like a letter C curled around the Omaha metro area. The southern boundaries anymore are like Otoe and Lancaster County. The western end would be like Seward and Polk. The northern end would be like Madison and Thurston County. And then Washington County is the southernmost county adjacent to the Omaha metro area. Douglas County is CD2. And then Sarpy County, part of it's in CD1 and part of it's in CD2 now.
And they do that to try to make the district's population equal, all 3 of them?
The populations have to be equal under Supreme Court precedents, but the Republicans in the legislature redrew the districts to protect Terry and Fortenberry is what they did. And that's why the lines were drawn the way they were drawn.
I know that you're the Democratic nominee. You ran through the primary election, and you've been nominated to run in the November ballot as a Democratic, and you're running against an incumbent who happens to be from a different party. Tell me about his record and how of representation for the district and how you feel about that.
Well, Mr. Fortenberry has represented the district now for 10 years. He's running for a 6th term. And Mr. Fortenberry is part of the problem. We have a job-killing gridlock in Washington, D.C. that has hurt the economy, and it's slowed down job creation. And Mr. Fortenberry has been part of the problem. He has voted the overwhelming majority of the time with the Tea Party and with the special interest groups. He has a record that's really out of touch with the values of our district. He voted to shut down the government last year. It cost the economy $24 billion, 120,000 jobs. He's voted 4 times to privatize Medicare, turn it to a voucher program. If he got his way on Medicare, seniors would be paying thousands of dollars in additional out-of-pocket medical costs every year. He's voted twice against increasing the minimum wage. In 2007, he even voted against it when it was supported by a Republican president. And he's voted over 50 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which would cancel 20 million insurance policies and cause complete chaos in the economy and the insurance market. So he's not really working for Nebraska anymore. He's working for the Tea Party and for the special interests.
You mentioned in that response the shutting down the government. I was watching the Sunday talk shows recently, and that seems to be a strategy that the Republican Party wants to use in the future to encourage the president to change his ideas. How do you feel about that as a strategy? Do you have an alternative to it?
Quite frankly, I think the government shutdown is reckless and immoral. I mean, Mr. Fortenberry took the position last year that unless President Obama cancels the Affordable Care Act, he's going to hurt the economy. And he basically he held the economy hostage in the hopes that President Obama would cave and cancel the Affordable Care Act. And like I said earlier, it cost the economy a lot. And let me tell you something. I follow the news regarding the Congress very closely since I'm a candidate. There's almost daily talk from Mr. Fortenberry's party bosses about a government shutdown. And there's talk, Ted Cruz behind the scenes last week was talking about a government shutdown in September. Ted Cruz has a lot of influence over the House members in the Tea Party. Today in one of the talk shows, Paul Ryan said that emphasizing GOP unity was more important than avoiding a government shutdown. I mean, there's been talk about a government shutdown over ending the Export-Import Bank, over stopping the EPA power plant regulations, and over stopping any Obama executive order on immigration. I mean, there's almost daily talk of a government shutdown from various party bosses. And let me tell you about Mr. Fortenberry. If his party bosses want a shutdown, he'll do it again. He's a follower. He's not a leader.
And so along with that, him being, as you said, a follower, how is that representing the citizens, the residents of Nebraska? And how would you do it differently? What would be your position?
Well,
it's a big territory. We talked about it being the big C shaped around Omaha.
Well, I share the values of our district. I really do. My emphasis is on the middle class. The key to a strong economy is a strong middle class. And I plan to work for the middle class, something that Mr. Fortenberry hasn't done. I mean, Mr. Fortenberry voted for the regressive Ryan Fortenberry budget, which would cut taxes for oil companies, insurance companies, banks, and could end up with a tax increase in the middle class. That's what he's supported. My emphasis is totally different. My emphasis is on the middle class. I want to see an increase in the minimum wage to $10.10 per hour over the next 3 years. That would reduce dependence on government programs, emphasize work, reward work over welfare. I would have voted for the farm bill that passed earlier this year. Mr. Fortenberry voted against it.
I was going to ask you about that in just a moment. Yeah,
he voted
please.
with the Tea Party against the farm bill. Mr. Fortenberry and I have a big disagreement. I think we should have a farm bill. Mr. Fortenberry doesn't think we need one, apparently. I would vote to improve the Affordable Care Act. I would not vote to repeal it. I mean, the Affordable Care Act has created 20 million new policies. 12 million people that used to be uninsured are now insured. I wouldn't vote to cancel those policies. I would vote to tweak the act and improve the act. And I also support infrastructure investments and investments in renewable energy, which would create millions of middle-class jobs. It all starts with the middle class. Mr. Fortenberry's philosophy is trickle down. He believes if we give the wealthy more money and more power, somehow it will benefit the rest of the economy and the rest of the people of Nebraska. Well, the last 20 years has completely and totally debunked Mr. Fortenberry's economic philosophy.
You mentioned earlier the Farm Bill, and I want to ask you a question kind of related to that. You mentioned a lot of good things that I've got questions about now. You're running for an opportunity to represent the 1st District, and Nebraska is a very wide and diverse state. Do you consider the 1st District to be a rural district or an urban district?
I think it's urban and rural both. The population of the district is about 600,000. We've probably got 300,000 people in Lancaster County, mostly urban. So it's 50-50. So you have to deal with both urban and rural concerns. So it makes it very challenging, but at the same time very interesting as well too.
So going from that, Lincoln being one of the larger cities in the district, and it being a mix of urban and rural, how do you embrace the Farm Bill, which we think of as often being just for rural residents? Is it really a farm bill?
Well, there's two components of the Farm Bill. You have the section of the Farm Bill that, deals with the economic and business concerns of the farmers, subsidies, insurance, this kind of thing. But a big component of the Farm Bill are the food stamp program, the SNAP program.
I once heard it referred to as a Farms, Foods, and Jobs bill. Would that be a fair assessment?
Oh, absolutely.
So it does more than just help farmers.
Correct. The SNAP program, the food stamp program, draws support from urban members of Congress. The farm section of the bill draws support from members from rural district, and so it's created this bipartisan coalition of both urban and rural over the years, and the Tea Party tried to blow up that coalition, and they almost blocked the Farm Bill, and at the end of the day, Mr. Fortenberry voted against the Farm Bill along with the Tea Party.
Wow. Another thing you mentioned in your discussion was infrastructure. And a few weeks back, we had a candidate for NPPD in studio. And they talked about moving power across the state and across the country. The power grid, bridges, roads, those are all infrastructure projects. When you're elected, would you support those, and how would those help our economy?
Absolutely, I would support infrastructure investments. The interesting thing about infrastructure investments is it has bipartisan support. The Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO support investments in infrastructure. I mean, investments in infrastructure would potentially create millions of jobs, millions of middle-class jobs. And before the current administration, infrastructure investments enjoyed bipartisan support. President Reagan signed into law infrastructure investment projects, so did Bush 43. But since January 20 of 2009, Mr. Fortenberry and his party bosses have opposed infrastructure investments. Mr. Fortenberry and his party bosses have denied an up or down vote to the American Jobs Act that would create 1 million new infrastructure jobs, reduce the unemployment rate by 1 percentage point, and America's infrastructure is like number 18 in the world right now. And we need to get back to number 1. We need to improve our roads and bridges and electrical grid, and I fully support those efforts along with the Chamber of Commerce and with our friends in the AFL-CIO.
I'm going to ask you a little bit more. It's kind of a two-part question to follow up on that. When I talk with people in the public about your candidacy and about the incumbent that you're running against, they say, well, he's a nice guy. He's really looking out for us. He hasn't done anything really bad. So, but you're telling me that he hasn't voted in a manner that actually represents Nebraska. So what challenges are you facing as a candidate getting this message of his voting record out to the public?
Well, I mean, there's a false perception out there that Mr. Fortenberry is some kind of a moderate, but he's no moderate. I mean, like I said, he's voted the overwhelming majority of the time with the Tea Party. He voted for the government shutdown. He voted to privatize Medicare. He voted against the minimum wage. He voted for tax cuts for large corporations. Right now, it's a retail campaign, meeting with voters one-on-one, but I plan to put some money in some TV ads starting in September to get the message out about his record and about how I share the values of the people here in Nebraska.
So we expect TV in a few months. But what have you been doing over the summer? Tell me, how are you getting your message out?
I've been very busy. I've probably going to about 2 or 3 parades every weekend. You meet a lot of voters that way. You meet a lot of great people, a lot of interesting people. I've just met with a lot of groups. Various groups invite me to address them and meet with them. I'm going to meet with the Nebraska Nurses Association Tuesday night. They're having their state convention, so I'm going to meet with the nurses and explain to them my stance on health care. I oppose Medicare privatization. I believe in mending the Affordable Care Act, not ending it. I'm addressing Democratic Party dinners around the state here in September and October, and I want to meet with as many groups as I can. If there's any group that wants to meet with me, please give me a call. My website is DennisCrawford2014.com. You can email me at denniscrawford2014.com. I'm willing to meet with anybody between now and November.
Thank you for that contact information. I'll ask you that again in a few minutes, and we'll get that on the screen later. You said you were meeting with the nurses. What was the name of the group again?
The Nebraska Nurses Association. They're having their state convention in Omaha on Tuesday.
Are there issues more related to wages in the economy or the health care administration? And what, as a congressman, will you do to help their position?
Well, I think they're concerned about both, quite frankly. I mean, they want a health care system that works well for everybody. It's in their interest to have more people have more insurance, have more access to health care. Like I said, Mr. Fortenberry, if he got his way, we'd go back to the old dysfunctional health care system we had before the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And most nurses are females, and so they're interested in equal pay for female employees. And Mr. Fortenberry in 2009 voted against the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which creates more income and wage equality between male and female employees. And the Ledbetter Act passed in early 2009 with bipartisan support. Mr. Fortenberry voted against it with the Tea Party.
Let's stick with that one, with the wages. In Nebraska, we'll see we're having on the ballot in November a minimum wage referendum. There's been a call for the president to sign some executive orders expanding minimum wage to the public. As a congressman, what would be your position? What would you do about wages, minimum wage?
I support increasing the minimum wage to $10.10 per hour over the next 3 years. An increase in the minimum wage would reduce poverty. It would reward work over welfare. It would reduce dependence on government programs. It's a job creation tool. I mean, if you give middle-class people, working people, more money to spend, they're going to go out and they're going to go out and spend it on goods and services that they need. So it's a job creation tool. I mean, one of the biggest problems we have right now in the economy is a lack of consumer spending power, a lack of consumer demand, a lack of consumer confidence. We need to give consumers more spending power. If they spend more money, they're going to get this economy out of low gear and put it into high gear. And all Americans, all Nebraskans would benefit.
I like the sound of that. That sounds great. And we're a capitalist society. We need that economy to run. At the same time, we often hear from our residents and citizens about their civil rights and equal rights, their access to the polls, and other issues. As a congressman, what would you do to address those ideas?
I'm deeply concerned about a U.S. Supreme Court decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act. The gutting of the Voting Rights Act has basically opened the door to a number of states to pass voter ID laws, voter suppression laws that make it harder for young people and minorities to vote. What does it tell you about a party that they want to try to prevent people from voting? They must lack confidence in their ideas and lack confidence in their ability to attract minority voters. There's a bipartisan piece of legislation of the House sponsored by Congressman Sensenbrenner of Ohio. He's no liberal, he's pretty conservative, that would reverse the Supreme Court's decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act. I would support that law and do whatever I could to get it passed. Mr. Fortenberry, once again, is with the Tea Party. He is not co-sponsored the Sensenbrenner bill that would overturn the Supreme Court's erroneous decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act.
So, in a nutshell, could you tell us, you're elected. November, you win the election. January, you start, hit the ground running. What would be the first thing you addressed as a congressman?
I think the two most important issues are jobs. We don't have enough middle-class jobs. The economy is expanding, but we need more jobs, better paying jobs, and so I would get behind infrastructure investment legislation and legislation investing in renewable energy as well, too. That would create millions of middle-class jobs. And the second most important issue, or maybe equally important, is health care. I would introduce a bill, what I call Medicare Plus. I have a proposal to tweak the Affordable Care Act. My Medicare Plus idea would allow somebody to go on the insurance exchange and choose Medicare as their health insurance carrier. Medicare would be allowed to compete with Blue Cross and Coventry. It's really needed in Nebraska because two health insurance companies control 80% of the market in Nebraska. If we get Medicare Plus into the mix as an option, it would require the private health insurance companies to lower their rates and treat their customers better. I mean, right now with this dispute between Blue Cross and Catholic Health Initiatives,
yes,
that could cause thousands of people to lose their doctor. If we had Medicare Plus in the mix, they would have less incentive and less power to do something this reckless and this irresponsible.
You mentioned the Catholic Health Initiative and Blue Cross Blue Shield dispute, and a lot of that comes from recent Supreme Court decisions about who has to comply with the Affordable Care Act. As a congressman, would you have any ability to change any of those laws or fix any of those disputes?
Well, the Hobby Lobby decision could be reversed through legislation. I mean, the Hobby Lobby decision, which Mr. Fortenberry supports, puts the employer in charge of their female employees' health care choices. I think that individual employees, not government, not politicians, not bosses, should make those health care choices. So I would support legislation to reverse the Hobby Lobby decision. I believe individuals should make health care choices, not big government, not unelected judges in Washington, not members of Congress.
So if there's someone in Lincoln that's interested in talking with you about these things or getting more information about your candidacy, how do they get in touch with you? You gave us a website earlier.
It's DennisCrawford2014.com. I have a Facebook page, Dennis Crawford for Congress. I have a Twitter account, Dennis P. Crawford. You can email me at dennis@DennisCrawford2014.com. Feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to meet with as many voters as I can between now and November 4th.
So are you have anything on the calendar, public events, public addresses, debates? Are you going to debate your opponent?
He has not responded to my request for a debate. I just think Mr. Fortenberry realizes there's a lot of anti-incumbent sentiment out there. The voters are angry. They want change, and I think he's reluctant to defend his record. he has yet to explain to the people here why he shut down the government and why he voted against the minimum wage. I think he just wants to skirt the issue and not have to explain these positions that do not reflect Nebraska values.
We talked a little earlier about looking at his record, and you mentioned some things that I was not aware of. Is there someplace I can find out more information about his record? Can I contact you and
Absolutely.
you share that?
You can contact me. There's a lot of discussion about it on my Facebook page, a lot of discussion about it on my Twitter account, and that's where you can probably find the best information. Also on my website too as well.
You mentioned a Twitter account. You hadn't mentioned that earlier. Is that hard to find? Just
Dennis P. Crawford.
Dennis B. Crawford. Okay, that sounds good. That's
Hopefully
pretty
it's easy to find.
Yeah.
So I'd request everybody follow me. I usually tweet about policy on a virtual daily basis on my Twitter account.
So what other things have you done? You had, as the press accepted you as a candidate, are you getting attention from I guess the Omaha World Herald would be our biggest paper and the Journal Star second biggest?
I've gotten a lot of attention from the Lincoln Journal Star. On a virtual weekly basis, Don Walton does a Sunday column, and just about every week he mentions something that I've said or done. I've gotten some coverage from the World Herald, and I've spent a lot of time doing small town newspaper interviews. You can find those on my website and my Facebook page. And I plan to play some newspaper interviews in some of the small town newspapers between now and November.
That sounds great. What do you say to someone who tells you, well, you know, this is a red state, we always elect Republicans, you really aren't saying anything that's... How do you tell a resident that you're the candidate they should vote for? Why should we vote for you?
I just say, if you're unhappy with Congress, if you're unhappy with the direction in Washington, D.C., you need to elect different people. You need different people to get a different result. You should vote for me because I'm going to go to Washington and try to solve problems and not play partisan political games.
Are you getting a lot of feedback from voters? Again, this is more of a red state than, it's more of a, I guess more of a lavender state. It's going a little bit blue. What are you hearing from the voters?
It's been pretty positive. People are unhappy with Congress. They like my message of change. They like my message that if you vote, you can fire Congress by voting for me. They like that message. And I've talked to some Republicans that told me they weren't going to vote for me. They're very respectful and very friendly. So the voters in Nebraska are good people, and I trust them to make the right decision in November.
I like that you said that you spoke with some Republicans that were very friendly. When I was growing up, it wasn't this adversarial party system that it seems to be now. I think your opponent is more, embraces that more than I'm comfortable with, that opposition. So what's on your agenda for this week? What have you got planned? Where will you be?
Well, Tuesday I plan to go to the Nebraska Nurses Convention. Friday I'm going to tour the Beatrice State Developmental Center with Lieutenant Governor candidate Jane Raybould. The Beatrice State Developmental Center is more than just a state issue.
Yeah.
We're familiar with Heineman's mismanagement of the BSDC, but it's also a federal issue. The Ryan Fortenberry budget that Mr. Fortenberry has voted for 4 times would cut funding for Medicare and Medicaid, which would hurt BSDC. They may have to close their doors if Mr. Fortenberry got his way, so it's a very important issue.
I did not know that. I assumed it was just a state of Nebraska issue. Thank you for elaborating on that one.
And then September 1st and Labor Day, I'm going to be in a parade in Schuyler. A lot of Hispanic voters in Schuyler, and I can tell Hispanic voters watching my record and my views on issues of immigration are much closer to yours than Mr. Fortenberry's. Mr. Fortenberry stands on immigration, reflective of Steve King and Michelle Bachmann. I'm going to go in there as a problem solver in immigration.
That's an issue that is really dear to my heart and important to Nebraska's future. And as a federal candidate, I'm hoping you can do something to address immigration, fair and balanced and equitable immigration reform.
I mean, here's my position as immigration. I agree with Ronald Reagan and Bush 43 on immigration. I support the Senate immigration bill that passed last year by a 2-to-1 majority with bipartisan support. Last year's Senate immigration bill would create an earned pathway to citizenship, increase funding for border security, and it would also improve the finances of Social Security and Medicare and reduce the deficit. It's a win-win deal for everybody. Mr. Fortenberry's party bosses have refused to allow an up or down vote on the Senate immigration bill. If Mr. Boehner and Mr. Fortenberry were to allow a vote on the immigration bill, it would pass with a combination of Democratic and Republican votes. They're governing against the will of the majority of the House and of the country. And let me tell you, Mr. Fortenberry's record in immigration is really quite regressive and reactionary. He supported the 2005 Sensenbrenner bill that just made it through the House, didn't go through the Senate, that would make any aspiring citizen, any aspiring American a felon, and anybody that helped an aspiring citizen would also be a felon.
Wow.
And Mr. Fortenberry has been against an earned pathway to citizenship. He is also in favor of amending the 14th Amendment to eliminate birthright citizenship. So he is with Steve King and Michelle Bachmann and Ted Cruz in immigration.
I did not know that. That's a little scary.
Our positions on immigration couldn't be more different.
Well, as we're running out of time, it seems like we got really interesting and some issues that we need to talk some more about. I hope you can come back and talk with us again sometime soon.
I'd be happy to come back, Benny.
That'd be great.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
And I'd like to thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Watchful Citizen, a public cable access program brought to you by the Lancaster County Democratic Party. Our program airs on Time Warner Cable Public Access on Tuesday nights at 10:30, Wednesdays at 6 p.m., and Saturdays at 12:30. You can also watch it on our YouTube channel, Lancaster County Democrats. My name is Benny Shope. I'm your host. I'd like to again thank Dennis Crawford for being our guest in studio, and we'd like to ask you to tune in again for another episode of The Watchful Citizen.